Hi, everyone. We're going to start right now. So we're live on Facebook. Hello, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I hope everyone is doing really, really well. And thank you very much for being here on a Saturday. My name is Kiran, and I will be moderating this forum. Before we begin, I would like to first welcome all of our participants. So we're really pleased to be having a few representatives from local and international organizations who've joined us on Zoom. And to all of our participants on Facebook, a very warm welcome to all of you. As we all know, in today's forum, we will be discussing about the role of empathy when it comes to social impact. And we chose this topic in conjunction with World Mental Health Day, which took place last week. And because of all the struggles that we may be facing across the world due to COVID-19, now more than ever before, we need to be more united in terms of togetherness, compassion, and of course, empathy for everyone around us, including ourselves. And that has led to our discussion today. And the host for today's forum is MPS Psychological Services, which is a mental health care center based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And I would also like to welcome our speakers for this forum. We're very delighted to have Sarah from Colombia and Yasmin from Brazil, two incredibly inspiring team members from Global Changemakers, which is an international youth organization that focuses on supporting youth-led sustainable development across the world. So Sarah and Yasmin, how are you guys doing today?
Hello, everyone. Hi. Doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to the discussion we're about to have.
Thank you, Kiran, for your introduction. Hello, how's everyone doing?
Both Sarah and Yasmin have extensive experience in working within their communities as well as when working with vulnerable populations. So to all of our participants, at any point throughout this forum, you are more than welcome to send in your questions through the chat or through a Google form link, which I have just sent in the chat. Or you could also present your question verbally. So if you would like to present your question verbally, then we ask that you kindly click on the raise your hand button first before we acknowledge you so as to not disrupt the session. And to all of our participants on Facebook, please feel free to send in your questions in the comments and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. And throughout the forum, we will also have specific segments where we would love to hear some of our participants' thoughts. So when that time comes, please feel free to unmute your mic and share so that we can all learn from one another. So without further ado, we are going to start off with a very quick icebreaker. So not only do we have participants from different organizations, but we also have participants from different parts of the world today. So we would love to get to know where everyone's from. So I'm going to be sending a link through the chat. All right, I just sent a link. So if you could all click on that link and type in where you're from, and I will then share my screen so we can all see the many different countries that are here with us today. Okay, so we have Brazil, Colombia, Malaysia. Do we have any others? I think a lot of our international participants are yet to join. So far, we only have 3 countries. Yep, still 3. Let's give it like 10 more seconds. If we have no more, then we will continue. Okay, I think we are gonna continue. So thank you for all those that participated in that activity. And now we can officially start our forum, which is going to be divided into 3 sections. The first being an exploration of the word empathy itself. And the second is the connection between empathy and social impact. And finally, we're gonna look at how we can take care of our well-being when it comes to empathizing. So before hearing from our speakers, let's all first take a moment to think about what empathy means to us as individuals. So based on our existing knowledge and experience, how would we define empathy, or what does empathy mean to us? And there are no right or wrong answers. So let's take 2 minutes to type out our answers in the chat section in not more than 2 sentences, and then we'll read them out as they come in. And to our participants in Facebook, please feel free to join in and share your thoughts in the comment section.
Love gives you eyes that cannot see. It's filled with words you never speak. I waited all this time to see if you're still waiting around. Well, I've been waiting around. And the sky's been falling down. The world keeps spinning round. Why you laughing? Our love stretched wider than the sea, but I couldn't swim and I went too deep. You said there were things you needed from me. We'd have to wait around and see. Yeah, well, I've been waiting around, and the sky's been falling down. The world keeps spinning round. Why you laughing? 'Cause I've been waiting around.
All right, so we have somebody who shared. Thank you, Yongsin, for sharing. And to her, empathy is to see things from other people's perspectives and to feel what they feel. That is definitely something that empathy is about. So thank you so much for sharing. And to all of our other participants, please feel free to share without fearing that we're gonna, another person share. Thank you. So Elizabeth said, empathy is being in touch with your own emotions enough to resonate with what others feel. And Mohana said, empathy is to share another person's feeling. Hasini said, empathy is to understand what people feel deep in their lives. Thank you all so much for sharing, and I hope we can keep this momentum going. So now we're gonna proceed with hearing from our speakers. So Sarah, perhaps we could start off with you. What does empathy mean to you, or how would you define empathy?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And I'm sure that you're going to be, be creating your own definitions of empathy with this chat that we're going to have. So empathy is is a central part of our humanity, is really what makes us human in a way. through it we can feel another people's elation, another people's grief, pride, or shame. It is the foundation of love, intimacy, and community that enables us to achieve that most precious things, connection. And this is what we're all about. And this was taken from a book by Raul Martinez. He's a philosopher, an author, an artist, and he wrote a book on empathy that I highly recommend so that you can understand better the concept. It is really we've been hearing a lot of phrases all the time on what empathy is, and it is putting yourself in another person's shoes. That's an expression, I think it's also used in English, but we use that in Spanish as well. And how we've been trying to define the concept many times and in many ways, and it's sometimes hard because how can you wear another person's shoes if you're wearing your own? And this is something that we're going to be discussing as well, because to be able to do that, we need to step into another person's shoes, but first we need to take our own shoes off. And that means, instead of thinking, okay, how or what would I do if I were in this person's situation, how can a person feel? How can a person feel in a certain context of, I don't know, being brought up in a certain way, being raised in a certain family, having been through difficult situations in which have nothing to do with what you've been through, right? So how can I be in, for example, Yasmin's shoes if I was not born in Brazil, I have not moved around the country, I do not speak the same first language as her? How can I do that? And I'm curious to hear about what Yasmin has to say about how she will define empathy.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for sharing in the chat as well. I will bring you a definition of empathy based on some linguistics, which is something that I love personally. I love studying languages, and also tell you a little bit about why I think empathy is important for human connection. So the word empathy comes from the 1880s. It was coined by a German psychologist called Theodor Lipps. And the word in German, I will not be able to pronounce, but it's something like Einfühlung. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce it, but this prefix ein, it means inside. So in other words, empathy means feeling from the inside of someone else. So it's not only putting yourselves in their shoes in an external way, but going a little bit deeper and trying to feel and see the world from their lenses, from their eyes, and try to understand their perspective. Later on, there was another researcher called Daniel Goleman, and Daniel Goleman divided empathy into 3 different types. So the first type was cognitive empathy, and cognitive empathy is being able to understand someone else's point of view. So if Sarah shares her opinion on a topic and I don't necessarily agree, I can still exercise my empathy to understand where she's coming from or why she sees that topic that way. This is very common when we are trying to empathize or talk, have a dialogue with someone that has a different political view as we do, or someone who was raised in a completely different world or a completely different culture. We maybe will not change our own opinions, maybe we will not change the way we think, but we're still going to be able to connect with that person because we understand where they're coming from and we can add from their perspective to ours. The second kind of empathy is the emotional empathy. So it's a lot about what you guys were saying in the chat. It has to do with feeling what the other person is feeling. So if Sarah tells me about a situation that she felt really angry and there was an injustice that was committed against her or something, and she comes in and tells it to me, I can feel the way she's feeling. I can understand the way she's feeling, why she felt that way, and I can feel the same with her. So that's the emotional empathy. And then the third type of empathy that Daniel Goleman mapped out was the compassive empathy. And compassive empathy is one that we as change makers and people who work helping other people, listening to others, we exercise a lot. because it has to do with understanding someone else's point of view, feeling the way they're feeling, and understanding their needs so that you can come in and help them satisfy those needs somehow. So that's the third kind. And it doesn't mean there's different levels. So it doesn't mean if you only felt cognitive empathy for someone and it didn't necessarily meet their needs, it doesn't mean that you were not empathetic. It just meant that for that conversation and for that person, the kind of empathy that you exercised was a different one. So that's how Daniel Goleman put it. He's the main researcher about emotional intelligence as well. And he connects a lot, you know, being able to understand yourself and your own emotions in order to be able to understand someone else's emotions and connect to them. The other thing that I was going to share with you is that there is an important difference between feeling empathy and feeling sympathy. So like I was saying to you in the beginning, empathy has this prefix "ein" from German, which means from inside. It's pretty much like in English, right? In, feeling from the inside of someone. And sympathy has a Greek prefix, syn, which means it's the same prefix as symphony, for instance, when you're feeling with someone, but sort of walking on the side of them, not necessarily from within, but together. But there's still a sense of separateness. You can sympathize. If you sympathize with them, you can then understand or maybe like the same things that they like. You can identify with them. You can walk together with them, but you're not necessarily empathizing, really understanding the world from their perspective. You're still kept separate. So that's the difference between the two. And feeling empathy and exercising those three kinds of empathy in our relationships and also in our work as change makers is really important, because that's what helps us connect to other people like human beings. If you guys know, there's this amazing author that I love, and I've read almost all of her books, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's an actor from Nigeria, and she's an amazing woman. And she says that empathy is the way to live together with other human beings, because it forces you to imagine the way others live, and it helps you see them as human beings as well. So like someone was saying in the chat, let me see, Mohana was saying in the chat that empathy is share someone else's feelings. Elizabeth was saying that empathy is being in touch with your own emotions so that you can resonate with others' emotions as well. You can resonate with what they feel. And this is what Chimamanda is saying. When you realize that you have all these emotions, that you are human, that you are vulnerable, that you make mistakes as well, that sometimes you say things that you didn't think before, that sometimes you feel angry and you feel sad, and that's all part of being human. You can also, from exercising empathy with yourself, you know, like trying to put yourself in your own shoes, so to speak, and be connected to yourself and really be mindful of what you're feeling, you can then exercise empathy for the other person, and identify when they're feeling sad and when they're feeling angry and why, and be ready to listen actively and so on. So it's really important for human connection. And I believe we're going to talk more about this, but I think that's how I think about empathy in all its different formats and circumstances that it may arise.
Something that I think that we haven't mentioned yet is that it is really important to understand how we can sometimes exercise empathy towards some human beings, but not others. And this is something that I think we need to think about and we need to feel, because as we, well, so this comes from also from philosophical tradition, and it is a division between bound and unbound empathy. Bound empathy is the empathy that you have towards people that you know and are similar to you. So you can feel what they feel, and you can imagine, because, well, empathy, we haven't mentioned that either, but empathy is an exercise of imagination, because you need to imagine how that person is feeling, and you have to use all your creative resources to see, okay, so for example, if Yasmin is going through grief because she had a loss in her life, well, I haven't had something and what went on, and I can sort of imagine how she might have been feeling. Hello?
Okay,
We
I
can
think
hear
I
you.
think you're back.
You lost me for a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, sorry. Where did I
great.
did you guys stop listening me?
I listened to everything. It was just your video was
A little
delaying.
bit. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay, so I won't repeat it. But
Great.
what I really wanted you guys to think is there were some, for example, there were in the after World War II, there was a book released with the journals of some of the guards in Auschwitz and other concentration camps, and it was revealed what the guards and um, the guards were talking about, and they talked about their families. They wrote letters, loving letters to their families, and it's really easy to put, I mean, to think about the guards in Auschwitz and in the other concentration camps as terrible people. They were monsters, and that is a way to dehumanize them as well. And what has been what people have been discussing about people that were involved in terrible crimes against humanity is that uh, they dehumanize them, so they were able to feel empathy towards their close relatives or people they thought were similar to them. But it is much more complex if there's a certain group that has been categorized as um, well, there are different definitions, but they talked about them as insects, about the scum of humanity, and so on and so forth. So if this person is not human, then I cannot treat them well, or I can do something really terrible to them. But if I do think they're human, then I can treat them all right, and I can feel what they feel. I can understand. So we need to be aware of this as well, because as change makers, we need to make sure that we have an unbound empathy, because we want to empathize with every single human being and not just someone that looks similar to us, right? Someone that speaks a language similar to us, someone that looks similar to us, or that has been through similar situations than us. So we need to expand the way we think about human beings. And that's why we were both talking about how central to the human experience it is to feel empathy.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I want to make you all a recommendation. I'm going to put the link on the chat, but there's a research done in the US by I think it's the Soul Pancake YouTube channel, something like that. And what they did was they tried to test out this empathy gap. So there's basically two ways where you can feel an empathy gap. The first one is when you've overcome a challenge that the person is going through at the moment, and because you already went through it and you overcame the challenge, then we have a tendency as humans to diminish the other person's suffering because we've already been through it, and we tend to even like psychologically, biologically, and so on, our memory tends to stop then what we went through in the past, so that we won't continue to suffer with it after we already overcame that challenge. So if the person is going through something that you already overcame, you have we as humans have a tendency to have more difficulty empathizing with that person. And then the second gap of empathy is the one that Sarah was sharing, which is the identification gap, which is when we have more trouble to have empathy towards someone who looks different than us. And that could be race, that could be religion, that could even be sexual orientation, that could be your favorite soccer team. If the person cheers for the rival soccer team, here in Brazil that happens a lot, then it's harder to connect with them. There's many ways. If the person is different than you, then we as humans have a harder time empathizing with them. And so going back to this study I was mentioning, they try to test this gap they had two groups of women, one group of white women, the other group was Black women. And the women had to listen to an audio of someone who was telling about her experience losing her grandma for cancer. And then what they did in the study was they took, for instance, first the group of white women, and they put them the headphones, and they had to listen to the audio of this person sharing her experience. And then they put a picture of what that person looked like. And first, the picture was a picture of a white woman. So they would listen to the audio and look into the person thinking they're white. And then they did it again with changing the picture. So the woman now in the picture was Black, and they were listening to an audio of a Black woman being white. The difference in this study was that the group of white women listening to the white woman sharing her experience, listened to the audio for a longer time, and they even cried. They really felt to what the person was saying and so on. When they changed the picture, a lot of times what happened was they forwarded the audio. So they were skipping a few parts. They were like, okay, I already got it. I understand what she's going through. I don't have to listen to the whole thing. And they were kind of diminishing and had a hard time empathizing with her. I will put the link in the chat. So if you guys want, you can see the whole experiment taking place in the video. And it's really interesting to see how we as humans, we have this condition of living in groups. And I think this is something that we brought since, historical ages. We would live in groups to protect ourselves, groups that looked like us and so on. But now socially and even like politically and so on, that could have so much harm in our society because we're so diverse, right? And we shouldn't separate each other based on those characteristics that also make us human and make us unique and so on. So it's important. I think the first step in exercising empathy in those cases is being aware of the fact that you might have an empathy gap. Being aware of it, I think, is the first step. And then the second step would be exercising your imagination and curiosity for the other person. So being curious, having a sense of non-judgment when talking to people and asking more questions than giving answers or making comments, and being really open to learning from each other and so on. So I'm going to find the link and put it in the chat for you.
That's great. Yes, and I think that on that note, we should also mention that in this world that we're living at, we try to be politically correct all the time, and we try to be, because it's a nicer way to live, right? To be empathetic towards everyone and to be nice to everyone. And we sometimes have unconscious biases that we sometimes know we do have them all the time. We are submerged in biases, in prejudices, in different things. But if we're not conscious about it and we say, okay, I'm having a really hard time empathizing with this person right now, how can I tackle, for example, that cognitive empathy? Because that will allow me to move towards a deeper sense of compassion, right? So I think instead of trying to think of ourselves as, okay, I'm perfect, I am a change maker, so I must be the best at empathizing and so on and so forth. But let's move on towards, it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy to empathize with everyone all the time. It is hard because we've been through different things, and it's basically that. It's difficult. So let's move on from that correctedness towards an openness, a curiosity, an actual commitment to go beyond what's going on and what we would naturally feel, because it's natural that we don't feel as close to people that are not as similar. But how can we, with all our years of evolution, our years of being change makers, our years of trying to do good in the world, move beyond that and learn, instead of just, I'm okay, I'm good, I know this already. Okay, let's learn more.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Yasmin, for that amazing introduction. I think it's really interesting how we don't just have one type of empathy, we have 3 types of empathy. And this wasn't something that I knew until recently when I joined the mentorship program and I learned about it myself. So, and also I think it's so interesting, Sarah, how you said we always talk about putting ourselves in other people's shoes, but then before doing that, we have to take off our own shoes. So I think we will be exploring that in time to come throughout this forum. But for now, we have a question that came in while we're still in the introduction. Somebody sent in a question through the Google form asking, how do we sort of differentiate between empathy and compassion?
Interesting
So would you like to
question.
start, Yasmin? If you could answer that
I think
question.
I can start. So empathy has a lot to do with understanding a different perspective. It has a lot to do with curiosity, understanding, imagining, trying to put yourself in someone else's place, under someone else's lenses, and so on. Compassion has it brings you, how can I say that? A desire or a responsibility to act towards that person. So that's why the third type of empathy by Daniel Goleman is called compassive empathy, because it's when you're able to take a step forward and meet their needs somehow. And so it's like the intersection between empathy and compassion is compassive empathy. I think compassion does not happen without empathy, but empathy might happen without exercising compassion, because it might be only cognitive empathy. It might be only feeling what the person is feeling and not necessarily trying to meet their needs somehow, or to make yourself available to help them. So in my perspective, compassion has this extra step of acting on behalf of them, identifying their needs and making yourself available. What do you think, Sarah? Do you want to add anything?
I agree completely with what you said, but maybe to add that, there are different theories and different philosophers that will talk about empathy. And there's even, I came across a book called A Case Against Empathy. And I thought that was very interesting because they were talking about sympathy, really, about how sympathy will not get us anywhere, and that what they were sort of promoting was compassion. So instead of so it is different, but you would have to read the different authors to see where they're coming from. I'm not sure if that's clear, but yeah, I agree with what Yas just said. It might be a matter of what philosopher or what author you're following, but the authors that we're following at the moment, or that we agree with, are the ones that state how empathy and compassion are different, and compassion requires a call to action. I would say something around the lines of, okay, I'm not just, it's not it, so if we think about sympathy, to put it in the terms that we're talking about, it would be something like, oh, I'm sorry you're going through that, right? So yeah, I'm sorry. But to say something like, I feel you, how can I be there for you, right? It's completely different, and it has a different effect on the other person and to yourself as well. Because when you're doing the exercise, and there's a lot of experiments in empathy, even with very small children, and how they are able to help others because they can feel what the other person is feeling, and feelings are contagious biologically, because emotions and the basic emotions, I think they're called in English, are supposed to be contagious, because they are completely related to our humanity and to our to the way that we can move on as, what do you call it, evolutionary. They are contagious because you want the other person to know you're sad so that they can help you. Or, if we feel joy, if another person feels joy, you want to join them in that joy, because that's a really nice feeling to feel, and that's something that connects us, and it's sort of the social glue, if we want to call it at that. But yeah, I think I moved a bit from the topic, but I just wanted to explain a bit how feeling sort of, if you read different authors, you might want to find that they say empathy and compassion are totally different, and the one cannot happen if the other one is present. But the way we're talking about this is what Yas just mentioned, so that we don't lose you guys if you read another author or get, I don't know, confused in that way. I hope I was clear.
Yeah, that's why I really like going to the root of the words and trying to understand, like, back when this word came to existence, when we started using it, who created it, why did they decide to join this small word with this word to create this other word, like what was the intention behind it. And for empathy, it was exactly that. Like, if you translate literally from German to English, it means in feeling, feeling from inside. So that's what empathy was in the beginning. And I feel like those words, with time, they kind of tend to become buzzwords, and we keep using them in different contexts and without necessarily looking into what they really mean. And so in compassion, like, even if you analyze the, like, the word itself, the roots and so on, it would give you a sense of acting as from passion to act on behalf of someone else. So I think there's an extra step there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Yasmin and Sarah. And I think from what I understand, it's, you know, compassion kind of compels you to take action, sort of. And empathy is you understanding what the other person is going through in order for you to be able to take action. So we have another question that came in on Facebook. While empathy is more appropriate in a helping profession, do you think sympathy is necessary to maintain the helping profession for a lay person?
Can you ask the question again?
Yeah. While empathy is more appropriate in a helping profession, do you think sympathy is necessary to maintain the helping profession for a lay person?
Helping profession meaning you're working with other people and you have to meet their needs somehow. Yeah. Okay. I think empathy is still the most important thing. However, what I will say is empathy only works when you have self-love, self-care, and self-compassion. So it's exercising empathy in your profession without forgetting about yourself that is going to help you do your job well. That's what I would say. So as a change maker, for instance, like every day, Sarah and I in our team at Global Change Makers, we deal with young people who are working on very complex issues. So one day we might hear about this change maker, I don't know, in the Philippines who's working to end pollution in their city and so on. The other day we might hear from this other change maker who is fighting against police brutality in Nigeria, like happened yesterday. I was talking to this change maker from Nigeria and she was saying that she got taken by the police and so on during the protests. The other day I might be, in my own house looking at the news and seeing everything that's going on in Brazil politically, and working directly with those issues might affect us quite a lot if we don't take care of ourselves first. So it's the whole metaphor that you see on the plane every time you fly: put on the oxygen mask on yourself before putting it on someone else. So in your profession, if you decided, like us, like me and Sarah, to dedicate your professional career to helping other people, then you need to look into yourself first and do that constantly. That does not mean like spending 2 years taking care of yourself and then, okay, I'm ready to take care of others. No, it's a daily thing, right? It's daily thinking about yourself, giving yourself rest when you need it, being honest and open about your own emotions, giving yourself time when you need time, and having the energy you need for yourself first so that you can give it to others. You're not going to be able to give something you don't have. So if you don't have empathy for yourself and you're not able to connect, put yourself in your own shoes and really connect with yourself, you're not going to be able to do that for the other person. So that's what I would say. I wouldn't say replace it with sympathy. I would say add self-care and self-awareness and so on, so that you can do your job well without overwhelming yourself too much and reaching compassion fatigue, which makes empathy become a burden, really.
Yes, when you were mentioning that, yes, I remembered an example that one of my university professors gave us. So she was in a group of psychologists that would do sort of consulting for different governmental agencies. And here in Colombia, one of the biggest issues is forced displacement. So some of the So this is a concept that might be foreign to some people. So I'm just going to quickly explain what it means. So imagine being in the countryside, you have your own house, you have your own, maybe you have a bit of a, you have cattle, or you have, you grow your own food and you have your place and everything. And then some, some violent group just comes and say, okay, you need to leave with whatever you have with you. You have to leave. And they leave and they come to one of the biggest, one of the big cities to try to make a living. This is a highly traumatizing event. It usually involves a lot of violence, and then they go into different agencies that help them, governmental agencies that help them through the process. And there's psychological help, and there's a lot of things, and they also help them with housing and with some pocket money so that they can get around and finding them a job and so on, because they were displaced from their own homes, from their own they have trouble meeting ends needs, because they don't have they cannot produce anymore anything. So imagine coming to a place where you're in the countryside, everything's quiet, you listen to birds, or you listen to the cows, the animals, but there you go to a city which is noisy, and you haven't ever seen a red light, you don't know how it works, you haven't seen many motorcycles or cars, and there's this noise that you can really. And then you go to an agency, and there's this person that is just, what's your name, where are you coming from, what's going on, blah blah blah. So this group of psychologists went for a whole week to just look at the people that were working in those agencies, and they made notes, and they sort of what do you call them, so they learned the way they were behaving, and then they took them out of the office, all the people working in this agency, and took them to another place, and they sort of recreated the something that I was describing you, the noises, the lights, everything that can happen in a city. And then after that, they started acting, doing role playing the exactly same way, because they were also professional trained actors. So they acted the way these people were, like, okay, what is your name, blah blah blah. And then when they saw the actors acting as they were, because they did a really good job, they started thinking, oh my god, this is the way I'm acting out of, this is my job, I go to this job, and this is whatever. But we're dealing with human beings. Human beings that have been through a very, very, very traumatic experience. They lost everything and more, and I'm here treating them like they're, next, whatever, what do you need, what do you want from me, I cannot do this. So taking care of ourselves and looking at ourselves while we're working in anything that we work on is highly important. And maybe we should talk a little bit more about compassion fatigue, because I think that this is something that is highly important when we are change makers, and it can happen easily. As Yas was telling, we listen to incredible stories, because usually when the stories come to us, they are from a place of change makers that have already done really amazing things. But when you're listening to sad stories over and over and over again, it can reach to a point in which, okay, next, okay, I have heard a million of sad stories, I have heard million of stories that are beyond sad, beyond excruciating and painful. And we tend to close ourselves, and we close our hearts and our ears and our understanding, because it's too much to handle. So yes, maybe if you want to explain a little bit more about compassion fatigue, and then we can give some tips on micro resilience and how you can work around it.
Yeah. So compassion fatigue, the definition of it is when exercising empathy and compassion it starts feeling like a burden for you rather than a motivation to act on behalf of someone else and on yourself. So it starts to become overwhelming to notice the world's problems. And your response to that is either to protect yourself by like pretending like you're not seeing anything. So like Sarah was saying, next, one more refugee, whatever, you know, like protecting yourself from that and diminishing other people's suffering and not seeing that as a problem anymore, you know, like just really protecting yourself from that, like walking around homeless people in the city without even looking in their eyes, without even noticing them, without even, you know, thinking about them or even wishing well and so on. So it's really protecting yourself. Or the other way that is very common is you take on so much suffering to yourself that you, we call this super identification in emotional intelligence. It's when you start using that emotion as a lenses to see everything in the world. So so emotions stop being temporary, something that will go away. So you see a social problem, you feel sad, and then, you know, after a while it goes away, the sadness. This is normal, it happens to everyone. But with compassion fatigue is like you carry on that sadness, and it can become depression, it can become anxiety, it can become social anxiety and so on. So that's when compassion fatigue starts. I've been there a few times, you know, looking into the world's problems and feeling so small and feeling like I can't do anything. And then I would feel so sad and just so overwhelmed and almost give up doing like working for to mitigate those problems and so on. And there's a few things that we can do to avoid that from happening, so to prevent that from happening in our lives. And I think the first thing, like we were saying before, and I know we've been saying this a lot, but it's just because it's so important, being aware of yourself, being aware of what makes you feel that way, what triggers you to feel sadness, to feel anger and so on. When does that come? Does that come from when you hear a political speech? Does that come from when you walk past a homeless person on the street? Does that happen when you watch the news? Like, what makes you feel that way? Really try to map it out. Maybe even write it down, start journaling, thinking about what in your routine is triggering you to feel that way. And then I would say find a friend or a trusted family member or someone that could relate to you and will really listen to you, and open up with them and tell them, hey, this is going on. Because opening up and sharing about those things is already a form of healing. It's already a form of letting it go, and really and really understanding yourself. Because when you talk, you have to find the words that you want to use, you have to form your sentences, and that is already a self-knowledge process, and that helps you increase your awareness. So sharing with other people can actually help you be more aware of when those things happen and why and so on. And then I would say map out what your personal boundaries are. So if every time you watch the news you feel that way, maybe watch the news a little bit less. Maybe like watch it, maybe like listen to a review of the news that happened in the week once a week. You don't have to see it every day or something, you know. Maybe if you feel like you can't do anything for your friends who are suffering, maybe let them know that you need some time for yourself. Maybe if it's social media, I think social media has a strong role to play in this as well, compassion fatigue, because we're then exposed to so many problems. And like my Instagram page is only social projects and people asking for donations and so on. So sometimes I have to be like, okay, I can't give to all these projects. I'm going to spend less time looking at them. So really try to understand your boundaries, and that's okay. That's not being selfish. It's preserving your mental health so that you can continue to feel empathy. Because what happens with compassion fatigue in the long term is you avoid feeling empathy. Your own body biologically avoids feeling empathy, and you're unable to connect to people's sufferings. You diminish them, you pretend like they don't exist, and so on. And that's very unconscious. It happens very gradually and subtle, and it's very subtle as well. So I would say respect your personal boundaries. The other thing I would say that was very key for me in my social impact journey so far is valuing what I can do, and not only focusing on what I cannot do. So if what I can do is donate maybe like $5 to this cause, then I'll be super happy with it that I can help. instead of thinking, oh man, I can't donate the $100,000 that they're asking for. That's okay, right? I think doing your part and understanding and valuing what you can do, appreciating what you can do, appreciate that you're able to feel connection to others, that you care about others, appreciate the fact that you're human and they're human too, and you want to be there for them as much as you can. You don't have to do more than you can, otherwise you're going to fall into, you know, compassion, empathy, and be overwhelmed with it. So really value what you can do and be happy with it, because I think, you know, even the fact that you were able to exercise compassion and do something on behalf of another person is already something to be celebrated and not to be taken for granted at all. So yeah, so I think that's really important. I would say always find a way to express your needs and connect to your needs. If you feel like you need to rest, then express it and meet your need. You know, if you feel like you need some time to take some fresh air, be close to nature, you know, find ways to meet your needs and to really express them. Something that helps me a lot is write poetry. I write poetry a lot and I love reading and writing. I recently, during quarantine, I bought some watercolor paints and so on, and I've been doing some painting. This one behind me is one of them. And so like really finding a way to express what you need at the moment, only for yourself. It doesn't need to be shared. If you want to, you can, because art can also be a mirror for someone else and it can be a form of connection. But if you don't want to, you don't have to share, you know, just find a way. You know, music is like my life. I do everything with music. Sarah knows about this. Everything, like while I'm working, while I'm washing the dishes, cleaning the house, there's always music playing. And it helps me connect to my feelings. It helps me connect to myself, to my body, to my mind. And so find ways to understand what you feel at the moment and to meet and express what you need. I think that's really important. And if you're already feeling compassion fatigue, if you're already feeling like this is happening to you, if you identified it, if you related to what we were saying before on like why and how compassion fatigue comes about, seek professional help. I think this is always valid. I think you guys who work with mental health, you know this better than me, of course. But if this is happening, you know, look for professional help. Take some time to take care of yourself, to be able to talk about yourself and not only listen to others' problems. Your problems are important too. It's not only because you have access to education, internet, and water and soap and everything that your problems don't matter. They still matter. So yeah, I think don't diminish them. Don't diminish yourself and your problems, the issues you're going through. I think have the courage to look into yourself first, and then look for others.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, and I think with that they are super important, and we shouldn't forget the classics of micro resilience. So, Bonnie St. John, she's a motivational speaker from the U.S., and she talks about moving the body, which is super important. Even stretching or having a walk, we tend to sort of put our feelings in our body, so we get tensions in the neck, in the, or even in the stomach, in the arms, and everywhere. So moving the body is super important. Sleeping well is another thing. If you're not sleeping well, you're going to be grumpy, you're not going to be able to learn and be open to, you know, we always talk about, you know, showing up fresh and fruity for everything. So make sure you're resting, knowing your own boundaries and your limits, as Yas said. Something else is that you need to understand, okay, am I a trained psychologist and can I give therapy? Or can I just be there for a person that's struggling with something? So I think that is something that we always need to look back on. And hey, what am I trained to do and what am I not trained to do? Who should I? So if you go to a certain doctor that, I don't know, an ophthalmologist, and you talk about, no, I have a pain over here, and they're like, okay, I'm not specialized in that, maybe you can go to this other person, you know, you can talk to them about, okay, I know this particular you don't say like, okay, I'm not an expert in that, so whatever, you do whatever, but you do carry them with you to this other person so that they, you know, get the proper help. Also, making checklists So rather than to-do lists that can be very overwhelming, but when you know you have to do something, you can just build a checklist. So for example, for this particular meeting, I had a checklist with, okay, getting my headphones. These simple things that will be very frustrating if I don't get them. So getting my headphones, getting my computer in place, getting my charger, setting up the stage, even if it's a virtual place, but these are things that are easier if you do. And then when I sit here and for this talk, I have everything I need, and I'm not thinking, oh no, why? Because that is very frustrating, and that can be very tiring. I didn't get this. Oh no, I didn't read what I had to read before I started this, and so on and so forth. So making those checklists also, and I think Yas is an expert in that, and I always talk about it, and but she should be super proud about this. But prioritizing what is really important. So making sure your agenda, your calendar, your schedule for the day reflects your purpose. I'm saying Yas is great at this because she even schedules in time for doing poetry, singing with her friends, meeting them, which I think it's brilliant because we never think about having that in our schedule. And these are things that we actually need. So scheduling time for yourself, for resting, for moving your body, for breathing, and so on, is super important. And this is something that we often forget. Remaining positive, and when you're finding a lot of negative things in your life, and you're seeing the world through a lens of negativity, you need to ask yourself, okay, what is going on? What in this list is not working? How can I go back to feeling positive and feeling that things can improve and things can get better? How? Okay, something's not. So when you're talking to yourself in a very negative way, you need to go back to see what's not going on, and asking yourself, okay, what options do I have? When you're feeling hopelessness and you're feeling that nothing's working, what options do I have? Because I'm sure you have an option, even if the option is seeking for somebody else that will help you, and that is an option that you still have. Asking yourself, okay, what is really the challenge? So I'm sure that we can say there's a lot of big problems, big issues in the world, but what is the challenge that I'm facing at the moment? What is my compromise? What is, I'm sure that some is translation, but what is in it for me, and how can I work towards what is my responsibility in this issue, and how can I move forward with this issue, and what are my values in this situation? Going back to our moral values and where we stand from is really right, going back to the purpose of everything that we do. So I think that these tips, along with the tips that Yas just gave us, are really important towards not becoming fatigued of the world. That if we start looking at the news every single time, and we read every news outlet, and we stay in social media for a really long time, we're gonna start thinking something like, this is gonna all end up in 2030, and we're all gonna kill each other, and we're all gonna be in a very horrible situation. But we're gonna find hope that everything's gonna be all right at some point. And if they're not gonna be 100% all right, we will play a role.
Thank you, Sarah and Yasmin. That was very, very insightful in terms of the tips. And I think it comes down, especially as social impactors or change makers, or even anybody in the helping profession, it's about being selective in what you pay attention to in the world. So if you're always just focusing on the bad news, then you tend to forget to focus on what's good as well. So when people say, the world is a really ugly place, it's probably because they've been confronted with bad news over and over again. So thank you so much for those tips. And besides just, and a few questions have came in on this as well, besides just taking care of ourselves when it comes to empathizing, we also have to look at how sometimes it's really difficult to empathize with particular individuals or particular issues, which both of you have touched on before. So my first question is, do you think empathy is a skill that can be taught to ourselves and to another person? And if it is, what are some of the ways in which we can enhance this skill?
That's a great question. I love that. I think I'm not sure if empathy can be taught, but I'm sure that it can be practiced. So if someone has a really strong intention to be empathetic towards someone else, they can start practicing it. But it has to come from the individual. It's not something that can be imposed. There's no formulas, so it makes it a bit harder. It requires a lot of self-awareness. So that's why I think it's hard to teach empathy as a skill, because it requires the person to be very self-aware and conscious first. So it's a very individual thing, but it can be practiced. And I'm going to, like, in terms of the how, I'm going to focus on us as change makers. So how us as change makers can exercise empathy for others, right? So when we're creating a social impact project, or you know, in our helping profession and so on, I would say starting from cognitive empathy, really understand your beneficiary's point of view, really understand what they need and how they relate to the problem, from what perspective they see the problem that you're trying to mitigate. That's like the first thing. I would say try to put the social or environmental issue that you're trying to tackle on a human perspective. So try to see it from a human-centered way. If you're dealing with climate change, for instance, and you want to reduce climate change, always put a human face to it. How do people relate to climate change? Who are the people and the institutions that perpetuate the problem, and why are they interested in perpetuating the problem? And on the other side, who is the most affected by climate change? You might discover, for instance, that there's a lot of climate refugees fleeing their countries because of climate change. I met, for instance, a woman from Tuvalu, this small island in Polynesia close to Australia, in the ECOSOC Youth Forum in 2018. And she was telling me that her government was buying lands in other islands and also in the mainland, like she called it, Australia, to move people from Tuvalu to Australia because of the sea level rising in her island. And it's a tiny, tiny island, and it's being really, really affected by climate change. And so you might discover, for instance, that this whole issue that you're dealing with has a very human perspective to it. It has humans are being affected by it, and how can you connect to them to be able to solve the issue at large? So I would say really put a human perspective to the problem and analyze your project and how you're going to conduct the project also from a human perspective. So if possible, before implementing anything, listen first. Before acting, ask questions first. Before saying what you think about the problem and what you think a solution that might work, ask the people who are affected by the problem first. Hey, do you think this is going to work? How can we build this together? I think we have to change, as change makers, we have to change our perspective from doing stuff for other people to doing stuff with other people. Bring them closer to you, really understand how they see the process, how they would like this to be done, if they think that your solution works or not. And then I would say, you know, besides really listening actively and constantly to those people, I would say be aware of your assumptions, be aware of the things that you think are some way, but you've never tested it, you've never really asked people if that's really the case. You know, be aware of what those things are, and then, you know, ask questions, observe really presently so that you can understand and test your assumptions. I would say to exercise empathy as a change maker when you're creating and implementing social impact projects. When you create the project, try to fill the existing gaps instead of creating something that will not have an effective impact or that already exists. So if you want to, let's say, design a project to improve the access to education among refugee children, first look into what are the existing solutions. how people relate to the problem, and then find the gaps that you can come in and fill as a change maker. Otherwise, you're going to end up creating a project that will not be as effective because people are not going to need it so much, or, and even worse, a project that will compete for the same resources that, as other projects that are already in place. So you're going to create more competition instead of collaboration, and your project is not going to be effective. And everything comes from exercising empathy from the beginning and understanding the system as a whole from a human perspective. I would say also, once you implement and you start testing all those things and understanding if it really, really impacts the people on the ground, be honest about the impact that you're having and about even the negative impact that you might be having. So if you implement a project only for the sake of it, to be able to call yourself a social entrepreneur or a change maker or whatever, and you don't necessarily measure the impact effectively on the ground, you might end up, spending resources without having anything, getting any impact back, really any meaningful impact back. So be honest about the impact that you're having. What are the positive aspects of it? What are the negative aspects of it? And then have an open heart, an open mind, an open will to continue adapting and learning constantly. This is something that I learned a lot in practice working at Global Changemakers, because every time that we implement a project, we always have feedback. We always consider the feedback from people who participated in a project. And every single time that we implement the project again, in every cycle, we adapt it, we change it, we make it better. The Global Youth Summit, the events that we usually have in Switzerland every year, not this year, obviously, but that we usually have in Switzerland, has been improved maybe like 10 times or something, because it has been run 10 times. So every time it runs, we sit together as a team again, we consider the feedback given by participants, by facilitators, and we make it better each time. From the logistics sides to the speakers to the sessions, everything is considered. So that really helps us measure our impact and make it better every time that we do it. There's this story I learned from a mentor also in our mentorship program at GCM. Kiran is also a mentor. Neoni just joined us and she was a mentee this cycle too. Hi Neoni, it's good to see you. But I learned from this mentor this story that I wanted to share with you. The story is of a project that was implemented in Africa. I can't remember the country now, but it was in the countryside of Africa, so not in an urban area. And the project was to implement water pumps in the rural areas. So the thing was that the women from those villages had to walk like 4 or 5 kilometers every day to be able to access water. And then they would bring water back to the village, right? So that's the walk they would do, and they would all go together, get the water and come back every day. So the project was meant to bring the water pumps closer to the village so that they wouldn't have to walk such a long distance and come back. What happened was the women broke the water pumps. The beneficiaries broke the water pumps. And why? Because what they loved the most about about walking this long distance to get water was socializing. So they would talk to each other and share about their lives and share about what was happening at home and in the village and so on. And it would pass by so fast that it didn't really bother them to have to walk a long distance to get water. That wasn't the problem. And they broke the project. Imagine that. Now you go to this different country, you spend so much money and time and everything to build the water pumps, and the beneficiaries break it. And what was the mistake here from the project managers was they didn't take the time to exercise empathy in the beginning. They didn't take the time to listen, to ask them what really the problem was. Maybe a better project would be to facilitate the walking somehow. I don't know, maybe have like cart running with them, and they could go in the car and then they wouldn't feel so tired or something. Maybe shoes, maybe, I don't know. It really has to come from them. The solution has to be built with the people who are going to be affected by your project. Otherwise, you might be spending resources just for the sake of it, So what I would say to exercise empathy as a change maker is listen really actively, bring your beneficiaries closer to you and build the project with them and not for them.
Thanks. Yes, I think you reached super important points. And the first question was, can it be taught? Is this a skill that we can learn? I would say yes, definitely. um, I'm going to read a quote that says, the heart-wrenching story of one person's death moves in a way that statistics of millions of fatalities never will. Also from Raul Martinez's book. um, Storytelling, I mean, we can cultivate imagination through storytelling, education, arts, and we've heard a lot of songs that will bring you to tears, because that is a way that we can exercise empathy, definitely, and we can teach it and we can learn it farther. um, it's we there's a lot of things in arts, also paintings. There are paintings that have been made famous not only just because they're beautiful, but because they portray uh, yeah, human emotions, and they mobilize you to do things. Even photography has always, and I always think about, there are certain images that we've been seeing that really moves us inside. And we can also use in our own projects, we can use empathy in our favor. So for example, for global change makers, again, we started seeing how we are, I mean, I do believe that in the core of my heart, that we are a great organization and we have helped a lot of people, but we struggled a little bit about telling people what global change makers is. So there are a lot of people that said, okay, why don't you go to storytelling, tell the story of the people that you're helping, so that you can reach more people even. And that is something that we need to keep in mind as global change makers, as global change makers or change makers in general, people in the social impact realm, or even in the mental health realm, uh, or yeah, emotional health realm. How can we uh, use empathy in our favor, so that yeah, we explain what we do better, and we bring more people towards our movement, our organization, or whatever it is.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Yasmin. I loved how Yasmin, you shared that story, and I think it shows how important it is to just stop whatever we're doing and to just listen first before just jumping into problem solving mode, because obviously that's not always the best first step. And Sarah, in terms of arts, music, that is definitely something that I'm very passionate about as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think it really, really does have a lot of power in terms of communicating pain and emotions. So we have another question now, and I think this is a really, really important question. So thank you so much for bringing this up on Facebook. If you empathize with the same person week in and week out, and the person keeps repeating themselves, does it mean that we have failed to make a real connection with that person to make a difference?
Well, that's a tough question, because it really depends on the context, right?
Mhm.
So in a from a I don't know, in therapy, a therapist will show the person what they're repeating, or sort of give them back what they're saying, to sort of see if they catch that they're repeating themselves. As a friend, that's not something very nice to do, I guess. It's not very nice if you have a friend saying, okay, haven't you seen that you're repeating this pattern, or something like that? That's not very nice, and that's not very comfortable, right? So we really need to understand the context, and I would really like to know if that person that asked the question just now has a particular context that they would want us to explore more. But yeah, I guess it will really depend. If you are, I don't know, just a friend, you can say, hey, I've been noticing that you have been or you're going through this and that. Have you tried journaling, and then going back to seeing how things are relating, or something like that, that it's, not giving them back something directly, But yeah, being nice about it and giving them some tips, I'm not sure, it would really depend.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the context too. I was going to ask if the person wants to give more details, but in this case, I think what they mean is really this is the person is repeating a pattern that is not healthy either for themselves or for the other person, right? I think that's the context. In that case, I think I would go along the lines of what Sarah was saying, and I would add that maybe taking the time to talk to that person and ask them questions will help them realize what's going on, because many times even the person is not conscious of what they're doing, of that pattern. So maybe like find an opportunity to talk to them and ask them questions, so by speaking maybe they would become a little bit more self-aware of what's going on, and then you can even suggest small steps of change in a very suggestive language. So not trying to impose anything, not being strict, being really gentle and kind, and asking very small changes to the person if what they're doing is bothering you, so that maybe with time they would understand. But this takes a lot of patience, and it really depends on the context. So I'm a little bit hesitant to give any advice here because I don't know what's going on in that context. I would like to ask many more questions before saying anything, but I think that's my 2 cents. That's what I would say for now.
Yes, exactly. It is so hard to answer this type of situational questions without knowing the context.
Okay, if the person is comfortable in sharing the context, then I will read out their comment later. But for now, we have another question that came in, and going back to empathy being a skill that can be taught or learned, what are your thoughts on teaching a third person this skill? So I think I could provide an example. So for example, we have a project in place and we are able to empathize with that person's situation or the problem that we're trying to tackle, but we need to convince another person to be on board with this as well in terms of helping and like collaborating and solving that particular issue. So how do we go about in doing that?
I love what Sarah was saying about storytelling. I think telling the story helps a third person relate to what's going on a lot. So I remember when I created this NGO back when I lived in the US for refugee education. And when we got our first grant, I remember going into the pitch and I was like, yeah, I can give them the numbers. I can tell them that there is this X million children without access to education. I can tell them that this is a huge problem, but it's going to be just one more huge problem that the world is facing, right? Or I can tell them the story of Rishka, which was one of the kids that we had in the program. She was 12 years old and she didn't have access to a formal education, a formal school, but through our program, she was able to continue learning. And she was one of our most dedicated students. And when we left the program, she said, I promise you, I will continue learning because now I believe that I can be who I want to be, right? So her life and her perspective changed. The education gave her hope and so on. So we decided to approach that third party potential partner with her story and just be like, hey, what happened to Rishka can help to X many more kids if you give us $1,000. So that's what happened, right? I think stories have a really powerful way to connect to other people. I think I would say also bring them close to you and let them see the problem going on. Maybe like by seeing and hearing, they would connect to the problem as well. I would say as well, try to connect what you need for the project to something that they need as well. This is a bit more sort of strategic planning. This goes a lot into fundraising, finding donors, finding partners, and so on. Find where they can give and how this could benefit them as well. And this is very, very much focused on managing social impact projects. Like for instance, if I approach a company that wants to be known for being socially responsible, environmentally responsible, they want to reduce their carbon footprint because their reputation was hurt by something that they did or said along the lines of production or waste or something like that. if I have a project related to climate change, for instance, instead of approaching them with the numbers of climate change and the whole problem and so on, I would approach them by saying, hey, by contributing to my project, you're solving your problem. So that's the strategy of like bringing people closer. If empathy doesn't work, or if empathy, just showing the problem doesn't work, right? I would say, tell them that by doing this, they're benefiting them as well. And I think actually helping in that way makes it even genuine, and it makes it even more sustainable, because then they will want to continue doing this, because that's benefiting them too. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to add anything.
No, I completely agree with you. And going back to how can, I mean, it is harder if we think about empathy in abstract than a particular person and a particular story. So go back to what is it that you're doing? What is it that, yeah, who are you, going back to the question of who are you trying to help, right? Who is there behind the project, behind the titles, behind the because you were mentioning earlier, yes, about refugees. It's not refugees, and when you think about refugees, you have a certain image already posed by the media, probably, or social media even. So how can we go back to, it's not a refugee, it's a human being, and how to humanize that person. Okay, what does that person eat, drink? How can that person think about different issues? What is that person wearing? What is the taste of on that person's dry mouth, or something like that? Something that is very complex, right? In the way that human beings are complex.
Yeah, I have an example of this. I promise it's going to take 1 minute. But a few years ago, I was hired by this NGO back in southern Brazil. The city is called Florianópolis. It's an island. And the project was a participatory research on homelessness in the city and 3 other cities around it. So my job was to articulate the homeless people in the city so they would implement the surveys themselves. They would fill in the surveys, of course, and they would implement the surveys. So they would take us to the neighborhoods where the homeless were, and we would talk to them, and we did that with 937 people around those 4 cities. But the problem was, I had to meet with them every week on a Monday to see how things were going and to update the project. So the best time for me was in the mornings before my day started, so that in our team meeting, I could bring them the updates from the people on the ground, right? So I had to make this kind of bridge, and I had to meet them in the morning on Monday. So I always schedule with them at 10 a.m. on Monday on the place that they usually met. But the first week they didn't show up, the second week they didn't show up, the third week they didn't show up, and I was like so frustrated. And I was like, we're doing this project with them, we're doing everything right, they're the ones who are implementing the project, we listen to them when they want water or food or whatever, we give it to them, like we gave them meals, we gave them, like, what's going on? I don't get it. I was so frustrated. And then I talked to them and I said them, hey guys, I'm really frustrated that you're not, meeting here. Like I had to leave my home 1 hour and a half before to take the bus to go to that place. So, I was telling them all of this. And they were like, yeah, so what's going on is that we want to come here. We want to shower first. And they only let us shower at 3 a.m. in this particular, 3 p.m. in this particular place. And most of the times that we were going to meet, the night before, it rained a lot. And when it rains, we don't sleep because we risk losing the very few things that we have on the street. So we risk getting it wet. And a lot of the times, whenever there's like gangs or something going around at night, they also don't sleep because they risk losing their documents, or like people steal from them and so on. Sometimes the police comes and it's very aggressive at night. So they're like, for us, basically, it's really hard to sleep at night. So we sleep in the morning. That's what we do. And meeting you at 10 a.m. is so hard for us because we didn't get any sleep. So we had to change the time for the meetings with them so that it would be better for them to, take their shower and sleep a little bit so that we could talk about the project, and they would be well enough to talk about it. So that was a huge empathy lesson for me, to like, before suggesting anything, proposing anything in the project, to really listen to them.
Yes, instead of assuming and instead of
Yeah.
talking, asking questions. Asking questions is a huge one. What is the experience like for you? Asking something as broad as that, but as specific. How are you living this situation? What is it like? What is it like to be you? Tell me about a day in the life of you. Something around those lines. And that can open to a lot of situations of empathy, really, because then you learn about this particular person.
Thank you for sharing. And from what you guys shared, it made me remember about this activity that we did back in the summit and as well as in the mentorship program. I'm not sure if Yasmin, you would like to share, but it's called the Empathy Map Canvas. And I love that tool. And I think my mentee loved that tool as well. And I think it's something that can really help a lot of people who are struggling in terms of creating a persona for the individual that they're trying to help. So Yasmin, do you mind sharing a little bit about that tool?
Sure, I was actually going to open an image so everyone can see what it looks like, but it's a canvas, it's like a template, and you use it to empathize with people in a project. So right at the center, wait, let me share my screen so you guys can see it as well. Here, so this is the empathy map canvas. In the center, you would see the person you're empathizing with, and then you would answer all these questions around the person. So first, who are you empathizing with? You can give them a name, you can give them an age, you can give them a socioeconomic status, a role, you can describe the situation they're in, and so on. The second question is what they need to do. So what is the job they have to accomplish? So let's say we're empathizing with a refugee child named Rishka. She's 12 years old. She's coming from Syria, and she's been in Greece for 1 year. You describe her situation, and what she needs to do is she needs to continue her education, even if informally. She needs to be able to access some kind of content to continue studying, even while she's on the move, waiting to be accepted into a different country, waiting for her documents to be processed so she can go to a formal school, and so on. And then you would think about their senses, right? In their routine, in their daily life. What do they see? What do they say? What do they do? What do they hear? So really put yourself in their shoes. Like Sarah was saying, think about what things they see in their routine. What do they hear maybe from their parents, from their family, from people on the street? What do they do in their routine? If she's not going to school, what she's doing instead? What do they hear other people saying? Right? So that's putting yourself in their senses. And then lastly, you would think about their pains and their gains. Their pains are their fears, their frustrations, their anxieties, what they lack, what really hurts them, what makes them suffer. And then gains are what are their wants, their hopes, their dreams. What would they do if they could? If there's no limits, what would they do? What would they want? And this is a really interesting activity to do with your beneficiaries, but also with other stakeholders in your project. So if you want to empathize with the potential donor, for instance, you can put yourself in their shoes to be able to understand how to approach them better. You can do this with your team members. If you're having a conflict with a team member, try to use the empathy gap canvas to think the way that they think and to understand what they might be feeling and what they need. So this is a really useful tool. I'm going to paste this link as well in the chat so you guys can take a look at it with more time later and really use it and reflect about your insights.
Thank you so much, Yasmin, for that. It's a really, really cool tool, and I use it up to this day. So this will really benefit a lot of people, and not just for your projects, but if you're just trying to understand what your friend is going through, you could also use it as well. And we're going to open the floor to Q&A soon, but just before that, we received the comment on the context the person was talking about. So she said that it's about someone who has mental health issues, and they're trying to help the person refocus and get some clarity and ultimately seek professional treatment.
Yeah, in that case, I would say make space to listen to them, to ask questions. Maybe suggest that you can do some kind of art together, because art really helps you connect to yourself and express yourself. So maybe that could be one way, using art therapy. It's something that you can suggest and do it with them. And you know, maybe go to support groups or something with them if they don't want to go by themselves. That's all, but take baby steps. I would say, like, suggest one thing after the other, see what works, what doesn't. Be patient, be gentle, because I know sometimes getting out of your comfort zone and seeking for help could be a process, quite a gradual one. So I would say just take the person by the hand and walk step by step until they're able to do that by themselves.
Yeah, and it will again depend on what sort of, like, I'm sorry, I try to be careful with this because yeah, I would need to get even more context to know what sort of um, yeah, what sort of mental health condition they're at, because there are a lot of tools that you could potentially use, like Yas was talking about art, and art is projective in psychology, so we use a lot of projective tools. I'm not sure how I would call them in English, but yeah, we use a lot of tests and tools using art, and that is a great way of seeing something without thinking, because it does not happen with our, you know, with our rational brains. We're painting a picture, we're showing something about ourselves or something like that, but it's, you know, it's sometimes easier to see it and explained in a picture rather than, you know, talking about it. But yeah, we would need to see, and if you can get if it is in the context of mental health, get someone in that realm, get another therapist, another psychologist, or a psychiatrist, depending on what it is, to seek help and to better help this person in particular. And I'm really sorry that I'm not giving straight answers for this particular case, but I do try to be responsible so that we don't have yeah, we don't make something or bigger than it is or smaller than that the problem really is. So I really hope that this was helpful, but I'm really careful not to, you know, just answer the wrong thing.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Yasmin. I think a general answer would be best because we don't know exactly what the entire situation is, and we have very brief details about the context. But now we're actually going to open the floor to Q&A. So to all of our participants who are on Zoom, you can actually unmute your mic and ask our speakers questions. So if any, or if you don't have any questions, if you have anything to share, you can also do that as well. So we're going to take about like 5 to 10 minutes for that. Anybody who would like to share or ask questions, this is your chance to present them to our speakers. If we don't have any questions from participants on Zoom, there is a question on, oh, we did receive a question. So Patricia asked, do you know any studies on empathy and alterity?
Yes, yes. In Mexico, there are a lot of studies on alterity. There's this author Jimenez. I'm gonna write it in the chat, and Esteban Crotz. I'm gonna find it out so that I can write it on the chat. But yeah, in Mexico, I've read really important studies on alterity, and I think they would be very helpful to understand this.
Okay. And we have one question that came in on Facebook. So one of the problems that this person has faced is that they over empathize with some of their teammates and then they are taken for granted. So how do you think we could prevent from people on, taking granted and basically set up our own boundaries when we're empathizing with other people?
Yeah, I think this goes back to what we were saying before about compassion fatigue. I think it has to do with connecting to yourself and your emotions and to your needs, and not taking them for granted, not diminishing your own needs for the sake of other people's needs. Your needs are as important as theirs, even if you're not going through the same situation, even if you think that what you're going through is not as serious as what they're going through, it's still something that makes you feel and need things. So I would say always also voice your needs and your opinions, not always diminishing yourself or preventing yourself from saying what you want to say, from expressing yourself because of the other person. Find spaces, find trusted friends, trusted people that you can express yourself with. Find ways to really come up to them and say what you need and suggest, even small things that they can do to help you satisfy your needs at that given moment. I would say, listen to yourself as well, not only to other people.
Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I think no, I think that's a great answer, and I signed. Yeah, I agree with yes. I think that's a great approach to it.
And I think Hasani asked the same question as well. How to overcome when you're really empathetic towards your client and it's impacting your life. So how do you set up boundaries and at the same time help your client?
I think that supervision is a great way of doing this in a therapeutical environment. So if you're trying to help a client or a patient, do seek advice as well. Supervision is great. It's one of the greatest ways of learning what's yours and what belongs to the client, which I think is super important, super crucial in when you're working in any of these aspects of psychology, therapy. You need to be held as well. So you are a vessel for other people, but you need someone else to back you up.
Okay, thank you. And Mohana asks, what increases empathy? And I'm not sure if this relates back to what you guys have shared in terms of skills and storytelling, but other than that, is there anything else that you would like to add?
The first word that comes to mind for me is curiosity, about yourself first and about other people, and from a non-judgmental perspective, to really be curious and try to understand how they see the world as well, not only yourself.
Yes, definitely. Going back to even reading about it, looking at documentaries, movies about different situations that are strange to you. I don't know. I just mentioned some of the stories about people being forced displacement in Colombia. Maybe you can go back and read about that. And Yas shared some stories about homelessness in Florianopolis. Maybe you can research on that and going into different contexts and going into different stories. You can expand the way you feel about the world and people that are not as close to you and that are not as similar as you, and that can increase the way your sort of compassion circle.
Thank you, Sarah and Yasmin. I hope that answered your question. And I think we don't have any more questions coming in. So I think we can wrap up our session and our forum for today. A question just came in. Can you share a few studies about empathy. I think if Sarah and Yasmin, if you have any studies that you have found or have read on empathy, then perhaps if you don't have them on hand right now, you could always email them to me and then I can email them out to our participants later on if that's okay with everyone. Okay, so before we end, I think we're just gonna briefly run through all of the key takeaways from today. So we started off with talking about what empathy means to each one of us, and then how that differentiates from sympathy and also compassion. And then we looked at how sometimes we may face the problem of over empathizing and how do we take care of ourselves through self-care and to not, go into the depths of compassion fatigue. And then we also looked at how empathy could be a skill and it could be thought to ourselves and to other people. And then we went through a few stories from Yasmin and Sarah. So, and I think that is pretty much it for today. Do you have any last words, Sarah and Yasmin, for our audience?
Great. I just want to thank you guys so much for this discussion. I think it was very productive, and I'm so happy that we were able to do it this morning or this evening for you. And I have a few resources as well that I want to share. First of all, the book Empathy, Why It Matters and How to Get It by Roman Krznaric. I don't know how really to pronounce his last name, but this is the book. I read it about 2 years ago and it was really great. I really, really love it. I think the second one is very fun, is one of my favorite movies. It's called Inside Out by Pixar. It's an animation. And the way it goes is there's this little girl called Riley, and she's moving from Minnesota, I believe, to San Francisco. And in her head, you can see all the emotions interacting with her and also to each other. And there's lots of scenes where you can see the role of empathy playing. So it's a really great movie. It's an animation, so it's great to see on a weekend, maybe with your family, and then reflect. And it was all done based on psychological research. So everything that you see in the story is actually scientifically based. So it's a great movie. I really recommend. The other thing was something that you can follow. It's an Instagram page that I follow for about 5 years now, I think, and it's called Humans of New York. But it's not only New York, it's now international. When I first started following it, it was only New York City, but now it's really international. So this is a photographer. His name is Brandon Stanton, and he travels around the world interviewing people. And oh, great. Send me the link later, Patricia. Send me the link. I would love to hear him talking. I loved his book. So Humans of New York, this photographer goes around the world and he interviews people about themselves, about their lives and who they are, what they want to do, what is their dreams. And you just see the picture and you read their story. Basically, it's a great way to kind of go outside of yourself and see other people too, get to know other stories. The other one is a TED Talk. This is the last one, and it's called 9/11 Healing, The Mothers Who Found Forgiveness and Friendship. And this TED Talk is given by two mothers. One of them is a mother of a Muslim terrorist. The other one is a mother of a son who she lost during the 9/11 attack in New York. So this is a great TED Talk, and they talk about how through empathy they were able to connect to each other and not blame each other for what happened or anything like that. They really were able to like find connection and friendship. So it's a great TED Talk. Those are the resources I wanted to share. And also thank you guys for being here. And I hope we can stay connected. Follow Global Changemakers in our website, social media. We always have, Sarah and I will launch very, very soon a webinar on empathy by Global Changemakers. So yeah, don't forget to follow us there and let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah, thank you, Yas, and thank you, Kieran, for this invitation. Only another resource from the wonderful resources that Yas just shared. EPIX is, so we have one of our change makers is called Ini Rodriguez, and he's a Venezuelan change maker. And he tells stories. So he's also a photographer, and he asks people questions about their lives and everything, and then he shares them in the website. It's in Spanish, but I'm sure you can find a way to easily translate it, and I'm sure you're gonna see the way that yeah, you can find the core of what they've been feeling. And I think it's a very interesting exercise to enhance your empathy, going back to Mohana's and other people's questions of how to grow the way that you are experiencing empathy in your own life. Thank you so much for this space, and I do really hope that you can keep on this social impact and the mental health awareness. I do think it's very, very, very important work, and thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank you both for being here. It has been such a pleasure to have you guys speak on this topic. And I think a lot of us, all of us who's been tuning in, did learn a lot of new things today. So I hope we can use that knowledge that we've learned to upscale our impact in our own communities or even just to another individual. So with that, we've actually come to the end of our forum. So please stay tuned to the GCM's website. There's going to be a webinar coming out, like Yasmin mentioned. They both just recorded a webinar on empathy, so you can supplement your knowledge when it comes out. And there's also many, many different other webinars over there on very diverse topics as well. So if there's nothing else, then I would like to wish everybody a good day, a good evening, a good afternoon, a good morning. And we hope we can have more webinars like this in the future. But for now, this is it. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. And I hope you guys stay safe and stay healthy. Bye, everybody.